Okay, well, hi everyone. My name is Madison from Master of Project Academy. We are with Jon today, and Jon is one of our thousands of PMI ACP students, and he just recently passed his exam. And today we're going to talk to him a little bit about his certification journey. So first of all, congrats, Jon, and thanks for taking some time to chat with us today.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to meet with you today, Madison, and talk about my journey.
Awesome. So before we dive in, could you just share a little bit about yourself? Where are you from and what's your current job?
Sure. That's a good question. So I started my career early in the 2000s and kind of trained myself on some technical things and then moved into a more technical role with a hosting company, a web hosting company. And then fast forwarding a few years, I took a job as an architect in a Swedish software firm, and then ended up starting my own software company. So that's kind of from career perspective. That's a very high level overview. I'm based in Tulsa, Oklahoma, so it's right in the Midwest, which is fantastic if you want to fly anywhere on either coast. It's great, but no one wants to visit you here, so I wouldn't recommend it if you like to see lots of people. But it's a fantastic place to raise kids, and it's also a really interesting place from a technical perspective. Because in the Midwest, you can really stretch across both time zones that are the bigger time zones, the East and West Coast, and meet customers' needs in both places. And it's also easy to get anywhere in the world if you want to fly out of here. So it's fantastic from that perspective.
That's great. I'm actually from
Yeah.
Chicago originally, so I know what it's like to be in the
Yep.
middle and have options.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's jump into kind of the nitty gritty of the exam.
Sure.
So first off, how long did it take you to study for the PMI ACP exam?
So I started to eye the certification around Thanksgiving time. Just had a week there where I was really thinking of what do I want to do next, and then went ahead and purchased the course at that point. So I started my studying right at the beginning of December, knowing that with Christmas time coming, there would be some challenges there, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, right at the beginning of December, all the way through the end of January.
Wow. And in terms of the number of hours you spent, what did your day look like? How was it structured?
Yeah, so I was very purposeful about my approach to study, and what that looked like for me was on a Monday I would sit down, or even on a Friday, sit down and look at the courses and see how many classes would fit into approximately 1.5 hours a day. So I kind of charted my course that way, and then I made a list. I said, okay, Monday I'm going to get through this section. Tuesday, I'm going to get through this section, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and so on. And then for the practice exams at the end of each section, I knew that would take me about an hour because what I would do is go back through and review all the slides again, just reading them. And then I would take my practice test. And I knew that would take me about an hour. So I gave myself about an hour and a half a day.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And what was one of the biggest challenges while preparing for the exam?
I think two things. One was knowing, not knowing how to feel when I knew I would have Christmas time happen, right? And holiday would be there and family would want to spend time together. And that's no different than almost any month we face in the year, right? There's Valentine's, there's again, Christmas, there's New Year's, there's almost every month has something going on. So I was a little nervous, to be honest with you, that I would lose my stride, and then it would either A, be difficult to pick back up again, and I may not catch back up to where I wanted to be, or I may just quit altogether because, as you know, sometimes when you lose your motivation, it's really, really hard to get back on the horse. So I was a little nervous about that. And I think that was probably the biggest unknown to me. And then the second was just, staying consistent and not feeling like I was going to fail, even though all the signs said, hey, my practice tests were good. I was scoring, 80, 90% and above on all the practice tests that I took. I still felt a little nervous, right? Because you don't know whether the test is actually going to be like practice tests. So in the back of my head, I thought, you're surely going to fail this. But those were probably the two biggest things. Yeah.
Right. And how was it going back into that student mindset, assuming you hadn't been in school for quite a bit?
Yeah. That's a great question. I like to learn, just like a lot of people, but it's totally different than being a student. Yeah, and so it was a little challenging at first because I thought it's like exercising a muscle, right? You start to do it and you think, wow, I'm tired. That was a lot of work, and then you look at your clock and think that was only an hour. I can't imagine, going back to full-time school again, where you're actually learning to 6 and 7 hours a day, depending on how rigorous your schedule is. So I was really grateful that really, if you think about it, an hour and a half a day, even if you did it for 6 weeks, that's not a lot of time, right? We think of it, yeah, that's a lot cumulatively, but on a day-by-day basis, just 5 days a week, that's not a lot. And so I kind of treated it like an exercise routine. I thought, okay, I'm going to be sore for the first few, days, maybe the first week, but once I get into a rhythm, it'll feel much better. And that's what happened.
Awesome. That's great to
Yeah.
hear. It's
Hmm.
so nice once the rubber meets the road and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, I can do
Yeah.
this. And I've
Yeah.
done
Yeah.
this last
Exactly.
5 days. So,
Right.
you're ready to go.
Yep.
Um, and so in terms of the quality of Master of Project Academy's training materials, what did you think?
I thought the logical structure was great. There's two favorite thing was I could depend on the logical structure to be there and learn the things I needed, which is absolutely, crucial. And then the second thing that I really enjoyed was the ability to review all of the materials again manually, just read through them. I didn't have to watch anything. I could just do it at my pace. And also I could highlight or focus on specific areas that I knew that I didn't understand well. I could go back and look at that material. So having the slide deck there to me was really, really nice. And then the practice questions, right? Like that was key for me. So having those two pieces, the logical layout of the course was great.
Cool. And since we're talking about the practice exam questions,
Mhm.
how many did you work through before the actual exam, if you had to give an estimate?
Oh, good question. So what I did for my practice exams was, like I said, at the end of every section that I learned, I went through the practice exams. I did that pretty religiously. And then what I would do if I failed one, I would grade myself, and then I would go back and review the materials and even my notes, because I was very particular about taking notes as I listened to the courses. Um, and when I did that, then I just reinforced all of the information that I needed for those areas that I wasn't so strong on. So I went through every single course practice test at least once. And then I went out and found, I don't know, half a dozen resources on the internet from other providers, just as a way to nudge myself out of the comfort zone, because not all practice tests are the same. So I really did put myself through kind of what you would consider maybe a pretty extensive challenge to make sure that I was well-rounded enough, that I was learning what I should have been. And that seemed to really, really do well.
That's great. And how was the support you received along the way from Master of Project Academy?
Good question. There were some times where I saw some, I would learn some things and then wasn't sure about, you know, why was this worded a certain way, or what order did these things need to happen in. Part of the materials for this particular course, it really focuses on, how do you go from being a beginner to intermediate to, expert. And one of the concepts was, that you have to start and you be very rigorous about following process. That's one of the first things you're doing as a beginner, is just following process. And so getting those processes in my mind um, ordered correctly, I needed to ask questions. So I went out to the forums there in the course and just asked, hey, what does this mean? Or help me understand why this comes before this other thing. And every time I was, surprised to get help pretty quickly, just to help explain things a little bit better. And so I loved it. I thought the support was just where it needed to be.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So do you have any specific tips for exam day once that moment comes and you're ready
Yeah.
to go for it?
I do. I selected to do, well, first of all, you have to put an application in to PMI about your experience. And for that, I'd say don't get overly stressed about it. Focus on their requirements and what they ask for. So if they say this much time, then put about that much time of effort, of what you spent on your projects. And you should have no trouble from my experience. The second thing I'd say is, tips would be on exam day, if you're taking it from home, they want your whole area cleaned up and there's nothing around and you can't look or talk to anyone. I made the mistake of trying to read the questions out loud during the exam, and they didn't want me to do that. I actually got a little chat pop up that said, don't read out loud. So that kind of triggered me a little bit, and I triggered, not like really, freaked out, but I was like, okay, I had to breathe and calm down and relax into the test, and just take my time. And I would say that's another point to make is you have 3 hours to take the test. I thought that would be a lot of time. It ended up being every second I used it. So I ran out of time on my test. I had done all the questions, but I was going back through and reviewing ones that I was unsure of. And luckily, the PMI exam gives you the opportunity to select ones you want to go back and look at. So I was in the review process and my time was up. So I'd say, one of the things you should do in preparing for the exam is just to time yourself to make sure that, you can, you feel comfortable with getting into a rhythm of answering questions. And outside of that, I'd just say give yourself lots of time, and relax and just go for it. I think if you've studied well and you've been consistent with your effort, you'll see the results in the tests, and you'll pass.
It's amazing, the balance between mental and physical, just like Zen, of taking those deep breaths to calm yourself down really mentally, to tune in. That's great.
Yep.
And we are kind of segueing into this really well, but what words of wisdom or suggestions do you have for future candidates that are considering taking the PMI certification, as they're before they've made the choice?
Okay. I think, knowing why you're doing it is really important. I think for me, I do a lot of work with clients, and there's always been this kind of mysterious balance and dance, if you will, with customers and stakeholders, right? How do you serve them well? And then what's the most important thing when you're operating a business, or you're working on a project, or you work for a company? Why are you doing it? And really, I love that the ACP focuses on, it's about the client. It's about making sure that the client is served really well. And that's kind of an agile fundamental, right? Is we're building software and we want it to be valuable for that person, that company, that individual, or that team. So, my words of advice would be, take all that you can from the exam, and then ask yourself when you're done and you pass a test, how can I apply what I've learned, and try and start right away using some of those things, even in daily life, but, with your projects. Try practicing right away what you learned, because there's a lot of stuff in there. You can mine a lot of really valuable concepts and methods and different things out of the coursework and out of the learning process. But then what can you do to get it to use it right away? I think that's super valuable. And I would definitely suggest that to anybody working on projects, or whether it's software or even, engineering projects, or even home building projects. I mean, you can almost apply this to anything project-based. It's good information to learn for sure.
That's great. And then finally, how likely is it that you would recommend Master of Project Academy to a friend or a colleague?
Yeah, I definitely would. Right now, I'm in the middle of studying for the PMI, or the PC, the PMP rather. So, and I'm enjoying that coursework a lot. It's a good experience. I'm using the exact same methods to study. So I like the layout. I like the format. I definitely think it's helpful. And I've already recommended people to take a look at the Master of Projects coursework.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
No, I think you've been a lovely host. I've enjoyed this very much. I'm going to keep studying and keep learning. I just encourage people to, be consistent and realize that, you don't have to do this forever, but it's worth investing into yourself. So I'd say go after it.
Awesome. Well, congrats, and
thank you.
Good luck on your next exam. I mean,
sure.
You're already back in it. You
Yep.
just love that student mind frame so much. You're like, I gotta be back in it. Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for your time. And
sure.
Excited to stay in touch. Thanks, Jon.
Yeah, absolutely. And have a good one. Nice to see everyone. Bye-bye.
You too.